before we go anywhere at all, let's take a moment to get comfortable. You don't need to be sitting up straight. You don't need to be paying attention in the way you would during the day. If you're already lying down, that's good. If you're not quite settled yet, you can let your shoulders drop away from your ears. You can let your jaw unclench. You can let your hands rest wherever they naturally fall, because for the next little while, they don't have any jobs to do. The light in the room can be low, or it can be off entirely. The blankets can be exactly where you want them. If your eyes are already heavy, you can let them close, and if they're still open, you can let them rest on something soft and unimportant. There is nowhere else you need to be right now. Nothing about the next while requires you to be alert, or sharp, or ready to answer anything. You can let that readiness go. You can let the whole idea of following along go too. This is one of those rare times where drifting is not only allowed, it is the entire point. If you fall asleep somewhere in the middle, that is not a failure of attention. It is the most natural thing in the world. The words will carry on without you, and if you drift back later, they will still be here, moving slowly through the same ground. There is no test at the end. There is no moment where you will need to prove that you understood any of it. The only thing being asked of you, if anything is being asked at all, is that you allow yourself to be comfortable, and that you stop trying to hold on to the thread. The thread will hold itself. Before we start in earnest, there is one small thing worth saying, and it is said gently, not as a warning, but as a way of keeping everything safe and soft. This is a calm walk through a subject, made for rest and for gentle learning. It is not professional advice of any kind, medical or otherwise, so please don't lean on it for anything that matters in a practical way. It is a description of how things are put together, not a set of instructions for what to do about any particular body. And please, don't listen to this while you are driving or while you are doing anything else that needs your full attention. Find somewhere safe, somewhere you can stop moving for a while, somewhere you can let the day go quiet around you. That is the only setting in which these words make any sense, and it is the only setting in which they can do what they are meant to do, which is simply to accompany you into rest. And while we are still in this early, unhurried part of things, there is something else I want to mention, just once, and then we will leave it alone. If you would like to come back to any of this while you are awake, the No Fluff Anatomy and Physiology Guide is at the link in the description, and it covers the same ground in a form you can actually read, with your eyes open and your mind switched on. It exists for the daytime version of you, the one who might want to study properly. But you don't need it tonight. Tonight you can just listen, or not listen, or drift somewhere in between. The book will still be there tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that. It is not in a hurry, and neither are we. So let's slip into the subject now, not with a beginning that announces itself, but just by noticing something very simple. You are one thing. You are a single, whole person, with one name and one body, and one general sense of being here. But if you look a little closer, that one thing is made of an enormous number of smaller things, all arranged together in a way that somehow works. That is the whole story of anatomy and physiology in one sentence, really. The body is not one solid block. It is a collection of pieces, and those pieces are themselves collections of smaller pieces, and those smaller pieces are collections of even smaller pieces, all the way down to a scale so tiny that you cannot see it with your eyes alone. And at every level, the pieces fit together. That is what anatomy is. Anatomy is the study of how the body is put together, how the pieces are shaped, where they sit, and how they connect. Physiology is the study of how those pieces actually work, how they move, how they talk to one another, and how they keep the whole thing running. One is about the map, and the other is about the traffic on the roads. One is about the shape of the house, and the other is about what happens inside the rooms. And tonight we are going to start right at the bottom with the smallest living piece of all, and then climb upward, very slowly, through layer after layer of organization, until we can see the whole body from a distance, the way you would see a city from the window of a plane. By the time we get there, the body will not look like a mystery anymore. It will look like a neighborhood, full of familiar streets and buildings, all fitting together in a pattern that makes sense. So let's begin with the smallest thing that is still alive. That thing is called a cell. A cell is the basic unit of life. It is the smallest part of you that can still be said to be you, in the sense that it takes in food, it gets rid of waste, it responds to what is around it, and it can make more of itself. Everything alive is made of cells, or is itself a single cell. You are made of trillions of them, not hundreds, not thousands, but trillions. It is a number so large that it stops meaning anything, and maybe that is fine. The important thing is that you are not one cell, you are a whole country of cells, all living side by side, each one doing its own small job, and yet somehow also cooperating in a way that keeps you alive from one moment to the next. If you could look at a single cell up close, you would see that it has an outside and an inside. The outside is called the cell membrane. It is a thin, soft skin that wraps all the way around the cell, and its job is to decide what comes in and what goes out. It is not a hard wall like the wall of a fortress. It is more like the wall of a living room, a wall with doors in it, and those doors are selective. Some things are allowed through easily, like water and small nutrients, and some things are kept out, or let out only when the time is right. That idea of a boundary, a line between inside and outside, is one of the most important ideas in all of biology. Every living thing has some kind of boundary, some way of saying, this is me and that is not me. And the cell membrane is the simplest version of that. It is the fence around the smallest yard that is still a yard. Inside the cell membrane is a thick, watery fluid called cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is the general filler of the cell, the substance that everything else floats in. It is not empty. It is full of dissolved salts and sugars and proteins, and it is also full of tiny structures that do specific jobs. These little structures are called organelles, which just means small organs. Just as your body has organs like the heart and the liver and the lungs, the cell has organelles like the nucleus and the mitochondria and the ribosomes. And just as your organs each have a job, the organelles each have a job too. The nucleus is the control center, the room where the instructions are kept. The instructions are written in a long, twisted molecule called DNA, and those instructions tell the cell how to build every protein it needs and when to do it. The mitochondria are the power stations. They take the food you eat and the oxygen you breathe and turn them into a form of energy the cell can actually use. The ribosomes are the builders. They read the instructions that come from the nucleus and use them to assemble proteins, which are the working molecules of the body. Proteins do almost everything. They are the beams and the cables and the tools and the messengers. They give the cell its shape, they speed up chemical reactions, they carry signals from one part of the cell to another, and they allow the cell to move and change. So inside every single one of your trillions of cells, right now, there is a library, and a power station, and a workshop, and a postal service, all working at a scale so small that you could not see them with the sharpest eye. That is the first level of organization, the cell. One cell is already a working, living thing. But in a body like yours, cells do not live alone. They live in groups. And when a group of cells that are all the same general type live together and work together, that group is called a tissue. A tissue is the next level up, and it is the first level where we can start to see division of labor. In a tissue, each cell does a small part of the overall job, and because they are all packed together and communicating, the tissue as a whole can do something that no single cell could do alone. The word tissue, by the way, has nothing to do with the little paper squares you might blow your nose on. It comes from an old word meaning woven, and that is exactly what a tissue is. It is a weaving together of cells, a fabric made of living threads. And just as a piece of cloth can be soft or tough or stretchy, depending on what it is woven from, a tissue can be soft or tough or stretchy, depending on what kind of cells it contains and how they are arranged. There are 4 main kinds of tissue in the body, and they are worth naming gently, because they will come back again and again. The first is epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue is the covering tissue. It is made of cells that pack very tightly together in flat sheets, like tiles on a floor or shingles on a roof. It covers the outside of your body, where it is called skin, and it also lines the inside of your body, where it forms the inner surface of your mouth, your stomach, your intestines, your lungs, and every other hollow space. Epithelial tissue is a barrier. It separates one space from another, and it is very good at controlling what can pass through. Some epithelial tissue is smooth, like the inside of your cheek. Some is folded and ruffled, like the inside of your small intestine, where more surface area is needed for absorbing food. Some is covered in tiny hairs that sweep things along, like the lining of your airways. But in every case, the job is the same. Epithelial tissue is the skin of every space, the wall between the inside of the body and the outside of the body, and also the wall between one part of the body and another. The second kind is connective tissue. Connective tissue is exactly what it sounds like. It connects things. It supports things. It fills the spaces between other tissues and holds them in place. It is made of cells that are spread far apart, with a great deal of material in between them. That in-between material is called the matrix, and the matrix is what gives connective tissue its character. In bone, the matrix is hard and mineralized, full of calcium, which is why bone is strong and rigid. In blood, the matrix is liquid, which is why blood flows. In fat, the matrix is soft and energy-rich, which is why fat is good at storing fuel and keeping heat in. In cartilage, the matrix is smooth and springy, which is why cartilage works so well at the ends of bones, where things need to glide without grinding. In tendons and ligaments, the matrix is full of strong, ropey proteins that can pull and hold. So connective tissue is not one thing. It is a whole family of things, all built on the same basic idea. The cells are far apart, and the stuff between them does the real work. That stuff can be hard, liquid, spongy, or fibrous, depending on what the body needs in that particular place. The third kind is muscle tissue. Muscle tissue is made of long, thin cells that can shorten themselves. When they shorten, they pull. That pulling is what we call contraction, and it is the basis of all movement in the body. There are 3 types of muscle tissue, and they each do a slightly different job. Skeletal muscle is attached to bones, and it moves your body through the world. When you lift a cup or walk across a room or turn your head on the pillow, you are using skeletal muscle. It is the kind of muscle you can control on purpose. Cardiac muscle is found only in the heart, and it contracts without you having to think about it. It is a special kind of muscle that never gets tired in the way your arm muscles get tired, and it beats in a steady rhythm for your whole life. Smooth muscle is found in the walls of hollow organs, like the stomach, the intestines, the blood vessels, and the bladder. It also works on its own, squeezing and relaxing in slow waves, moving food along, adjusting the width of blood vessels, and emptying the bladder when the time comes. All 3 types share the same basic ability to contract, and that ability is what allows the body to move, both outside, where you can see it, and inside, where you cannot. The fourth kind is nervous tissue. Nervous tissue is made of cells that specialize in carrying signals. The main kind of signal-carrying cell is called a neuron, and a neuron has a very particular shape. It has a cell body, where the nucleus lives, and then it has long, thin branches extending out from that body. Some of those branches receive signals, and one especially long branch sends signals onward. The signal itself is a tiny pulse of electricity, followed by a tiny release of chemical messengers at the end of the branch. Those chemical messengers then drift across a small gap and affect the next cell in line. That is how the brain talks to the rest of the body, and how the rest of the body talks back. Nervous tissue is the wiring. It is the telephone network that runs through everything, and it is what allows the body to sense what is happening and respond to it quickly. When you feel the warmth of a blanket, that is nervous tissue. When your eyelids get heavy, that is nervous tissue. When you shift slightly in bed without waking fully, that is nervous tissue, carrying instructions from somewhere deep in the sleeping brain to the muscles of your back and your legs. So those are the four basic tissues: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. Covering, supporting, moving, and signaling. 4 verbs, 4 roles, 4 kinds of fabric. And just as cells group together to make tissues, tissues group together to make organs. An organ is a structure made of 2 or more tissue types that work together to do a particular job. The heart is an organ. The lungs are organs. The stomach, the liver, the kidneys, the brain, the skin, the eyes, all of these are organs. And each organ contains a mix of tissues, arranged in a way that allows the organ to do its work. Take the stomach as an example. The stomach is not just a bag of muscle, it has epithelial tissue lining the inside, to protect the stomach wall from the acid it produces. It has connective tissue underneath that, to hold the layers together and give the stomach its shape. It has smooth muscle tissue in its walls, in 3 layers that run in different directions, so that it can churn food like a slow, strong fist. And it has nervous tissue threaded through all of those layers, to sense when food arrives and to tell the muscle when to squeeze. 4 tissues, 1 organ, 1 job. That is how the body builds its working parts. It takes the same 4 fabrics and weaves them together in different patterns, like a tailor making a jacket, a pair of boots, and a sail from the same bolts of cloth, just by cutting and stitching differently. And then, 1 level up from organs, we have organ systems. An organ system is a group of organs that work together to accomplish a broader goal. The stomach is an organ, but it does not digest food alone. It works with the mouth, the esophagus, the liver, the pancreas, the gallbladder, the small intestine, and the large intestine. Together, those organs form the digestive system. The heart is an organ, but it does not move blood alone. It works with the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries, and together they form the cardiovascular system. The lungs are organs, but they do not manage breathing alone. They work with the trachea, the bronchi, the diaphragm, and the muscles between the ribs, and together they form the respiratory system. And so it goes. The body has around 11 organ systems, depending on how you count them, and each one is a team of organs with a shared purpose. Some of those purposes you know well, some of them are more hidden, but every one of them is always running, always adjusting, always coordinating with the others. And when we step back and look at all the systems together, we see the final level of organization, the whole body, the organism, you, a single living person, made of systems, made of organs, made of tissues, made of cells. Each level nests inside the one above it, like a set of wooden dolls, or like a city seen from higher and higher up. Think of it like a city, just for a moment, because the comparison is a comfortable one. A city is made of individual people. Those people live in households. The households are grouped into neighborhoods. The neighborhoods are organized into districts, and the districts together make the city. The people are the cells, the households are the tissues, the neighborhoods are the organs. The districts are the organ systems, and the city is you. Just as a city cannot be understood by looking at a single person, the body cannot be understood by looking at a single cell. But just as a city is made of nothing but people, the body is made of nothing but cells. The difference is in how they are arranged. The arrangement is the anatomy. The way the arrangement works is the physiology. And the whole thing, from the smallest cell to the whole sleeping body, is held together by the simple fact that every level fits inside the next. And here is the gentle, remarkable part. You are not doing any of this on purpose. Right now, as you lie there, somewhere between waking and sleep, your cells are dividing to replace old ones. Your tissues are repairing themselves. Your organs are adjusting their output from moment to moment. Your systems are talking to one another in chemical and electrical languages that never pause. Your heart is beating. Your lungs are filling and emptying. Your blood is moving through vessels so numerous that if you laid them end to end, they would wrap around the earth more than twice. Your digestive system is slowly, quietly processing whatever you ate earlier. Your nervous system is doing the strange and wonderful work of winding down, shifting from the alert rhythms of daytime to the slower rhythms of the night. And none of it asks for your attention. None of it needs you to supervise. It is the most ordinary thing in the world, and it is also, if you stop and think about it, a kind of quiet miracle, happening continuously, underneath everything else you call your life. So that is the map we are going to walk through in the hours ahead. Cells to tissues to organs to systems to the whole. And tomorrow, or whenever you next wake, you will still have that map inside you, whether you remember these words or not. But for now, you don't need to hold on to any of it. You can let the city of yourself go about its business while you drift. The cells will keep dividing. The tissues will keep holding. The organs will keep working. The systems will keep talking. And you, the whole of you, can rest. That is what you are built to do. That is what all those levels of organization are for, in the end. To keep you going, and to let you sleep. The heart sits in the chest, just a little to the left of center, behind the breastbone and between the lungs. It is not very big. If you make a loose fist with your hand, that is roughly the size of your heart. It weighs somewhere around 300 grams, which is about as much as a small apple or a bar of soap. And yet this small, quiet organ, about the size of a fist, has been beating since before you were born. It began its rhythm long before you took your first breath, back when you were still floating in warm fluid, no bigger than a grain of rice. It has not stopped since. It will not stop, in the normal course of things, for the rest of your life. That is a strange and wonderful thought to hold at 1 in the morning. Right now, as you lie there, a muscle the size of your fist is squeezing and relaxing, about once every second, and it has been doing that without pause for every second of every minute of every hour of your whole existence. It does not take breaks, it does not clock off. It does not wait for permission, it just keeps going, like the sea, like the tide, like something that has forgotten how to do anything else. But the heart is not just a single pump, it is actually 2 pumps, sitting side by side, working together in the same rhythm. The right side of the heart takes blood that has already been around the body, blood that has delivered its oxygen and picked up carbon dioxide, and it sends that blood to the lungs. In the lungs, the blood lets go of the carbon dioxide which you breathe out, and it picks up fresh oxygen which you breathe in. That is the first pump. The second pump is the left side of the heart, and it takes that freshly oxygenated blood from the lungs and sends it out to the rest of the body, to every tissue and every organ and every cell, from the top of your head to the soles of your feet. So the right side handles the trip to the lungs, and the left side handles the trip to the body. 2 pumps, 1 heart. The 2 sides are separated by a thick wall of muscle called the septum, which keeps the blood on the right side from mixing with the blood on the left side. That separation matters, because the blood on the right side is low in oxygen and the blood on the left side is rich in oxygen, and the body works best when those 2 streams stay in their own channels, like 2 trains running on parallel tracks, heading in different directions but never colliding. Each side of the heart has 2 chambers, an upper chamber and a lower chamber. The upper chambers are called atria, and the lower chambers are called ventricles. The atria are the receiving rooms. They are smaller and thinner, because their job is only to collect blood and pass it down to the ventricles. The ventricles are the sending rooms. They are larger and thicker, because they have to push blood out of the heart with enough force to move it through the whole body. When you hear the sound of a heartbeat, that lub-dub sound, what you are hearing is the closing of the heart valves, one set after the other. The first sound, the lub, is the closing of the valves between the atria and the ventricles. The second sound, the dub, is the closing of the valves between the atricles and the big arteries that leave the heart. Those valves are like one-way doors. They open to let blood move forward, and then they close to make sure it cannot slip backward. That is all a heartbeat is, really. 2 sets of doors closing in quick succession, over and over again, keeping the blood moving always in one direction, never backward, never stalling, never pooling where it should not be. The heart is made mostly of cardiac muscle, which we touched on earlier. Cardiac muscle is a special kind of muscle tissue that contracts on its own, without you having to think about it. It has its own built-in pacemaker, a small cluster of specialized cells in the right atrium, called the sinoatrial node. The sinoatrial node fires a tiny electrical signal about once every second when you are resting, and that signal spreads across the atria, making them contract, and then down into the ventricles, making them contract a fraction of a second later. That is why the atria squeeze first, filling the ventricles, and then the ventricles squeeze, sending blood out to the lungs and to the body. The whole thing happens in less time than it takes to blink. And then the pacemaker does it again, and again, and again. The electrical signal is so reliable that doctors can measure it from the surface of the skin, which is what an electrocardiogram does. That little tracing with the spiky line that you see on hospital monitors is just a picture of that electrical wave moving through the heart over and over, like a ripple on a pond, except the pond is a muscle and the ripple keeps it alive. Now, the heart does not do this work alone. It needs its own supply of blood, because cardiac muscle is like any other muscle. It needs oxygen and nutrients to keep contracting, and it needs a way to get rid of its waste products. The blood that flows through the chambers of the heart does not feed the heart muscle itself. The heart has its own blood supply, a set of vessels called the coronary arteries, which wrap around the outside of the heart like a crown. The word coronary comes from the Latin word for crown, and if you could see these arteries laid over the heart, you would see why. They sit on the surface of the heart and branch downward into the muscle, delivering oxygen-rich blood to every part of the heart wall. The heart is greedy in the best way. Even though it makes up only about 0.5% of your body weight, it uses about 5% of the oxygen your body takes in. It is always working, so it always needs fuel. The coronary arteries are how it gets that fuel. And when the heart squeezes, it squeezes its own vessels a little too, but the pressure of the blood inside those vessels keeps them open enough for the flow to continue. It is a beautiful bit of engineering, the way the pump feeds itself while it is pumping. Let us follow the blood through the whole journey, because that is where the anatomy really comes alive. We will start in the right atrium, because that is where blood arrives after it has been around the body. The blood comes back to the heart through large veins. The vein that brings blood back from the upper body is called the superior vena cava, and the vein that brings blood back from the lower body is called the inferior vena cava. Both of them empty into the right atrium. So the right atrium is like a quiet lobby, a waiting room, where blood from the arms and the head and the chest and the belly and the legs all gathers together. The blood is low in oxygen now, because the cells of the body have taken most of the oxygen out of it, and they have added carbon dioxide, which is the waste product of their work. The blood is also a little cooler than it was when it left the heart, because it has traveled all the way to the fingers and the toes and the skin, losing heat along the way. It comes back dark, a deep purplish red, not because it is dirty, but because oxygen-rich blood is bright red, and oxygen-poor blood is darker. Both are still red. It is just a different shade. From the right atrium, the blood drops down through a valve into the right ventricle. The valve here is called the tricuspid valve because it has 3 little flaps, like 3 tiny sails, that open and close. When the right atrium squeezes, it pushes the blood through the open tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. Then the right ventricle squeezes and the tricuspid valve closes, making the first part of that lub sound, the part that keeps blood from going back up into the atrium. Instead, the blood is pushed out through another valve, the pulmonary valve, into a big artery called the pulmonary artery. The pulmonary artery is unusual because it is an artery that carries oxygen-poor blood. Most arteries carry oxygen-rich blood, but this one carries blood away from the heart to the lungs, so it is still called an artery. Arteries are just vessels that carry blood away from the heart. Veins are vessels that carry blood back to the heart. It is the direction that matters, not the oxygen content. The pulmonary artery splits into two branches, one going to each lung. And inside the lungs, the blood flows through smaller and smaller vessels until it reaches the tiniest vessels of all, the capillaries, which are so small that red blood cells have to travel through them in single file. The capillaries wrap around the tiny air sacs of the lungs, and it is here that the exchange happens. The blood lets go of its carbon dioxide, which will be breathed out, and it picks up fresh oxygen, which will be breathed in. The blood becomes bright red again. It has been to the lungs, and now it is ready to go back to the heart and out to the body. The freshly oxygenated blood returns to the heart through the pulmonary veins. There are 4 of them, 2 from each lung, and they empty into the left atrium. The left atrium is much like the right atrium, a quiet receiving room, but the blood here is different. It is bright and rich with oxygen, and it is about to be sent everywhere. From the left atrium, the blood drops down through another valve into the left ventricle. This valve is called the mitral valve, because it is shaped a little like a bishop's mitre, the pointed hat that bishops wear. It has 2 flaps instead of 3. When the left atrium squeezes, the mitral valve opens and the blood fills the left ventricle. Then the left ventricle squeezes, and this is the big squeeze, the one that sends blood out to the whole body. The mitral valve closes, making part of that lub sound, and the blood is forced out through the aortic valve into the aorta. The aorta is the largest artery in the body. It rises out of the top of the heart like a great curved arch, and then it turns downward and runs along the back wall of the chest and the belly, sending off branches like a tree sending off limbs. Those branches carry blood to the arms, the head, the liver, the stomach, the kidneys, the legs, and every other place that needs oxygen and nutrients. When the aortic valve closes, that is the dub sound. The heart has completed 1 full beat, and then the whole thing starts again. Right atrium to right ventricle to lungs to left atrium to left ventricle to aorta to body to veins to right atrium. Around and around without ever stopping, without ever getting lost. The entire trip, from the heart to the lungs and back, takes only a few seconds. The trip from the heart to the big toe and back takes a little longer, but still less than a minute. The blood is always moving, always being refreshed, always carrying fresh oxygen to the cells and taking away the carbon dioxide they produce. It is a delivery system, and a waste collection system, and a heating system, and a communication system, all at once, all in the same fluid, and the heart is the engine at the center of it, the quiet rhythmic drum that keeps the whole circulation moving. Now, the blood itself is worth thinking about, because it is not just red water. It is a liquid tissue, which sounds like a contradiction until you remember that connective tissue can have a liquid matrix. The liquid part of blood is called plasma, and it makes up a little more than half of the blood. Plasma is mostly water, but it also carries dissolved salts, sugars, proteins, hormones, and waste products. Floating in the plasma are 3 kinds of formed elements: the red blood cells, which carry oxygen, the white blood cells, which fight infection and protect the body, and the platelets, which help the blood to clot when a vessel is damaged. Red blood cells are the most numerous by far. There are about 5 million of them in a single drop of blood. They are shaped like little discs with a dent in the middle, a bit like a donut that has not been fully hollowed out. That shape gives them a large surface area for picking up and releasing oxygen. Inside each red blood cell is a protein called hemoglobin, and hemoglobin is what actually grabs hold of the oxygen. Hemoglobin contains iron, and iron is what gives blood its red color. It is the same iron that gives rust its reddish color, which is a strange thing to think about, that the color of your blood comes from a metal, the same metal you might find in a nail or a frying pan. But there it is. Iron in the blood, carrying oxygen to every part of you. White blood cells are much less numerous, but they are vitally important. They are the body's defense force. There are several different kinds, each with its own way of dealing with invaders. Some of them swallow up bacteria whole. Some of them produce antibodies, which are proteins that stick to specific invaders and mark them for destruction. Some of them remember past infections so that the body can respond more quickly the next time. White blood cells are bigger than red blood cells, and they are more varied in shape. They can leave the bloodstream and move through the tissues, hunting for trouble. They are the reason you do not get sick every single day from the bacteria and viruses that are always around you. Most of the time, they deal with things quietly, without you ever knowing. Platelets are not even full cells. They are small fragments of larger cells, and they are involved in clotting. When a blood vessel is damaged, the platelets stick to the damaged area and to each other, forming a plug. Then a series of chemical reactions, involving proteins in the plasma, strengthens that plug into a proper clot. That is what stops the bleeding when you get a small cut. The clot is temporary, a kind of living bandage, and once the vessel has repaired itself, the clot dissolves away. It is a delicate balance, because the blood has to be able to clot quickly when there is damage, but it also has to stay fluid the rest of the time. If it clots too easily, that can block vessels. If it does not clot easily enough, a small cut can become dangerous. The body walks that line every moment, adjusting the balance as needed. So that is the heart and the blood, the pump and the fluid, the engine and the river. But the river needs channels to flow through, and those channels are the blood vessels. There are three main kinds, and we have already met them in passing. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. They have thick, muscular walls, because they have to withstand the pressure of the blood being pushed out with each heartbeat. If you feel your pulse at your wrist or your neck, that is the feeling of an artery expanding and recoiling as the wave of pressure from each heartbeat passes through it. Veins carry blood back to the heart. They have thinner walls than arteries because the pressure is lower by the time the blood reaches them. They also have one-way valves inside them to keep the blood from flowing backward, especially in the legs, where gravity is always pulling the blood down. And capillaries are the smallest vessels, the tiny, thin-walled channels that connect the arteries to the veins. They are so numerous that no cell in the body is far from one. It is in the capillaries that the real work of circulation happens. It is there that oxygen and nutrients leave the blood and enter the tissues, and it is there that carbon dioxide and other waste products leave the tissues and enter the blood. The rest of the circulatory system exists to get blood to and from the capillaries. The capillaries are the point of it all. If you laid out all the blood vessels in your body end to end, as we mentioned earlier, they would stretch for something like 60,000 miles. That is more than twice the circumference of the Earth, and most of that length is capillaries. The arteries and the veins are the highways and the main roads. The capillaries are the tiny streets and footpaths that reach every single house. And just as a city cannot function if the roads do not reach the houses, the body cannot function if the capillaries do not reach the cells. Every cell needs to be near a capillary, because every cell needs to receive oxygen and get rid of carbon dioxide. If the capillaries stopped reaching the cells, even for a few minutes, the cells would begin to suffer. That is why the blood is always moving. That is why the heart never stops. The whole system exists to make sure that no cell, anywhere in the body, is ever far from fresh blood. And so, as you lie there, the heart continues its quiet work. The right side sends blood to the lungs, where it becomes bright with oxygen. The left side sends that bright blood out through the aorta, down the branching highways of the arteries, into the tiny streets of the capillaries, where every cell in your body takes what it needs and gives back what it no longer wants. Then the blood begins its return journey, through the veins, with their one-way valves, back to the right side of the heart. And the whole circle closes and then opens again. Beat after beat, breath after breath, circle after circle. You do not have to direct it. You do not have to watch over it. You can simply lie there and let it happen. The heart knows its work. The blood knows its route. The vessels know their places. All of it is older than thought, older than language, older than you. It was beating in your ancestors and in their ancestors before them, and it will beat in whoever comes after. It is the most ancient rhythm in the world, and right now, it is yours. Let us step back from the heart for a little while and look at the blood vessels more closely, because they are not just passive pipes. They are living tubes with walls that can tighten and loosen, widen and narrow, repair themselves and grow new branches. They are not like the copper pipes in a house, which are the same width all the time and never change except to wear out. Blood vessels are active tissues, made of smooth muscle and connective tissue and a thin inner lining of epithelial cells. They respond to what the body needs from moment to moment. When you are cold, the vessels near the surface of your skin tighten to keep warm blood deeper inside where it matters most. That is why your fingers and toes get pale and cold in winter. When you are warm, those same vessels loosen and widen, letting more blood flow near the surface, where the heat can escape into the air. That is why your skin flushes pink when you exercise or sit in a hot bath. When a particular organ needs more blood, the vessels feeding that organ widen, and the vessels feeding less active organs narrow. It is a constant, quiet redistribution, like a city changing the timing of its traffic lights, depending on where the traffic is heaviest. And all of it happens without you having to think about it. The walls of arteries and veins are built in layers, and those layers tell you a lot about what each kind of vessel does. The innermost layer, the one that actually touches the blood, is called the endothelium. It is a single layer of flat epithelial cells, and it is incredibly smooth, so smooth that blood can flow over it without snagging. If the endothelium becomes damaged or roughened, as can happen with smoking or high blood pressure or high blood sugar, the blood does not flow as cleanly, and things can begin to stick where they should not. The middle layer is made of smooth muscle and elastic fibers. This is the layer that can tighten and loosen, and it gives arteries their springiness. When the heart pushes blood out in a great surge, the arteries stretch a little, absorbing the force. Then, between heartbeats, when the pressure drops, the elastic walls recoil, pushing the blood along. That is why blood flows continuously, not in sharp spurts. The arteries smooth out the pulse, like a hand smoothing a rumpled bedsheet. The outermost layer is made of connective tissue, tough and protective, anchoring the vessel to the surrounding tissues and preventing it from tearing under pressure. Arteries come in different sizes, and their walls change as they branch and narrow. The largest arteries, like the aorta and the pulmonary arteries, are mostly elastic. They have to be, because they receive the full force of each heartbeat. As the arteries branch and get smaller, they become more muscular, because at that scale the job is no longer about absorbing pressure, but about controlling where the blood goes. The small arteries, called arterioles, are the real gatekeepers. They are the ones that tighten and loosen to direct blood toward active tissues and away from resting ones. When you are asleep, for example, the arterioles feeding your skeletal muscles are partially narrowed, because those muscles are not doing much. The arterioles feeding your digestive system, on the other hand, may be widened, because your gut is still processing your last meal. The arterioles feeding your skin are probably in a middle state, keeping your body temperature just right under the covers. All of this is controlled by the nervous system and by chemical signals, working together in a balance so fine that you never notice it unless something goes wrong. From the arterioles, blood passes into the capillaries, and here the walls become as thin as it is possible for a living wall to be. A capillary wall is usually just a single layer of endothelial cells, with no muscle, no elastic fibers, no tough outer coat. It is thin enough that oxygen and carbon dioxide, and water and small molecules can pass through it easily. That is the whole point. The capillary is not built for strength or speed. It is built for exchange. It is built to let things cross. The blood slows down in the capillaries, because the total cross-sectional area of all the capillaries together is enormous. It is like a river spreading out into a wide, shallow delta. The water moves slowly through the delta, and that slowness gives time for things to settle and mix and trade places. The blood moves so slowly through the capillaries that there is time for oxygen to slip out into the surrounding tissue, and for carbon dioxide to slip back in. There is time for nutrients to leave and waste to enter. There is time for the whole purpose of circulation to happen. The capillaries do not work alone. Around them, in the spaces between the cells, there is a thin film of fluid called interstitial fluid. This fluid is not blood, but it is closely related to blood. It is formed from the liquid part of the blood, the plasma, that seeps out through the thin capillary walls. This seepage happens because the pressure inside the capillaries pushes water and small dissolved substances out. The proteins and the cells stay behind because they are too big to fit through the tiny gaps. The fluid that does escape becomes the interstitial fluid, and it is this fluid that actually bathes the cells. The cells do not touch the blood directly. They live in a warm, salty bath of interstitial fluid, and they take their oxygen and nutrients from it, and they release their carbon dioxide and waste into it. Then, at the other end of the capillary, most of that fluid is drawn back into the blood, because the pressure inside the capillary has dropped, and the proteins left behind in the blood create an osmotic pull that brings the water home. It is a beautiful, quiet exchange, a constant give and take, and the balance is maintained so well that the amount of fluid leaving the capillaries and the amount returning are almost exactly equal. Almost, but not quite. A small amount of the fluid does not return directly to the blood. That small amount is collected by another set of vessels, the lymphatic vessels, and carried back to the bloodstream by a longer route. We will come to that later. For now, it is enough to know that the tissues are bathed in a fluid that comes from the blood and returns to the blood, and that the capillaries are where the exchange happens. From the capillaries, the blood begins its journey back toward the heart. The first part of that journey takes it through small veins called venules, which are like arterioles in reverse. The venules join together into larger veins, and the larger veins join into still larger ones, until finally the biggest veins, the superior and inferior vena cava, empty into the right atrium. Veins are different from arteries in several ways. Their walls are thinner because the pressure inside them is much lower. They have less muscle and less elastic tissue. They also have a wider interior because they hold a large share of the body's blood at any given time. In fact, most of the blood in your body is in your veins at any moment. The veins are the body's blood reservoir. They can store a little extra and release it when the arteries need it. If you stand up suddenly and feel briefly lightheaded, that is partly because the veins in your legs have let blood pool there for a moment, and your body is adjusting to bring it back up. Because the pressure in veins is low, they need help getting blood back to the heart, especially from the legs, where gravity is pulling everything downward. The veins have three mechanisms for this. The first is the one-way valves we mentioned earlier. These valves are little flaps of tissue that open when blood is moving toward the heart and close when it tries to flow backward. They are spaced at intervals along the larger veins, like locks in a canal, dividing the column of blood into shorter segments so that the pressure needed to move each segment is not too great. The second mechanism is the squeezing of the skeletal muscles around the veins. When you walk or even when you shift your legs in bed, the muscles contract and press on the veins, pushing blood along. That is why people who sit still for very long periods, on a plane or at a desk, sometimes get swollen ankles or blood clots. The muscles are not squeezing, so the blood slows down. The third mechanism is the pressure change that happens when you breathe. When you inhale, the diaphragm flattens and the pressure in your chest drops, which helps draw blood up from the abdomen and into the heart. Every breath is a gentle pump for the veins. Inhale, and blood is pulled toward the chest. Exhale, and the one-way valves keep it from slipping back. Breath and movement and valves, all working together, all without conscious instruction. And so the blood makes its way back. It leaves the capillaries, where it has given away its oxygen and picked up carbon dioxide. It joins the venules, then the veins, then the great veins, and at last it reaches the right atrium once more. The circle is complete. But the story is not quite done, because the blood does not travel the same path every time. Sometimes it detours. Sometimes it goes through special routes designed for particular purposes. There are places in the body where blood takes a shortcut, or a scenic route, or a route that serves a special function. One of these is the portal system in the liver. The blood that leaves the stomach and the intestines is rich in nutrients, because that is where digested food enters the body. But those nutrients cannot go straight into the general circulation because they need to be processed first. Some of them are in forms the body cannot use. Some of them need to be stored. Some of them need to be packaged and sent elsewhere. So the blood from the gut does not go straight back to the heart. Instead, it goes to the liver through a special vein called the portal vein. In the liver, the blood passes through another set of capillaries, where the liver cells sort and store and transform the nutrients. Only after that does the blood return to the general circulation and then to the heart. It is like a truck coming off the main road to stop at a processing center before rejoining the highway. The liver gets first look at everything absorbed from the intestines, and that is why the liver is such a central organ in metabolism. We will come back to it when we talk about digestion. Another special route is in the kidneys. The kidneys are filters. They receive a huge amount of blood, about a fifth of the blood the heart pumps with each beat, even though they are quite small. The blood enters the kidneys through the renal arteries, and inside the kidneys it passes through a series of very specific vessels and tiny filtering units, where waste products and excess water are removed and sent to the bladder as urine. The cleaned blood then returns through the renal veins. The kidneys are not just passive filters, they are also regulators. They monitor the blood pressure and the salt balance and the acidity of the blood, and they adjust what they keep and what they release accordingly. Every drop of blood you have passes through your kidneys many times a day, and each time it is checked and cleaned and adjusted, like a car going through a service station over and over. There is also a special route in the lungs, which we have already touched on. The blood that goes to the lungs is all of the blood that the right side of the heart pumps. The lungs are the only place where the entire blood volume passes through with every circuit. The reason is simple. Every drop of blood needs oxygen, and the only place to get oxygen is the lungs. So the entire blood supply goes through the lungs with each complete loop. The pulmonary vessels are shorter and wider than the systemic vessels, and the pressure in them is lower. The right ventricle does not need to push as hard as the left ventricle because the lungs are right next door. But the volume of blood is the same. The right side pumps exactly as much blood as the left side, beat for beat. If it did not, blood would back up behind one side or the other, which is what happens in heart failure. The two sides are in constant balance, each moving the same amount of fluid, just to different destinations. And there is another special circulation, one that matters a great deal when you are lying still in a warm bed. It is the circulation to the skin. The skin has a rich network of vessels that serve two purposes. The first is to feed the skin itself, which is a living organ with cells that need oxygen and nutrients. The second is to control body temperature. When you are too warm, the vessels in the skin dilate, letting more blood flow near the surface, where the heat can radiate away. That is why you feel warm and pink when you are cozy under the covers. When you are too cold, the vessels constrict, keeping the blood deeper inside, preserving heat for the core. The hands and the feet and the nose and the ears are the first places to feel that constriction because they are the farthest from the center and the most exposed. At night, as you fall asleep, your body temperature drops slightly and the vessels in your skin open up just enough to let heat escape, which is part of why sleepiness and warmth are so closely linked. A warm bath before bed, a pair of socks, a soft blanket, all of these work with the circulation in the skin to help you let go of the day. So the blood vessels are not just a fixed set of tubes, they are a living, responsive network, a branching tree that reaches every cell in the body, carrying blood to the tissues and back again, adjusting its flow according to the body's needs, repairing itself when damaged, and growing new branches when needed. If a vessel is blocked, the body can sometimes grow new channels around the blockage, a process called collateral circulation. If a part of the body needs more blood because it is working harder, the vessels supplying that part grow and widen over time. The network is not static, it is dynamic, adaptable, always being rebuilt. And at the center of it all, the heart keeps its rhythm, the quiet engine that drives the whole system. The heart and the vessels together are called the cardiovascular system, and they are one of the first systems to form in the developing embryo, because every other system depends on them. Without blood flow, there is no oxygen. Without oxygen, there is no energy. Without energy, there is no life. The whole body is built around this one simple need, the need to keep the blood moving. And as you lie there, the blood is moving through all of these vessels. It is in your fingertips and your toes, in your scalp and your eyelids, in your stomach and your kidneys and your lungs. It is moving through the great vessels of the chest and the tiny vessels of the inner ear. It is warm and slow and steady, carrying oxygen and nutrients and hormones and heat to every part of you and carrying away the quiet waste products of resting cells. The heart beats, the arteries stretch and recoil, the arterioles adjust, the capillaries exchange, the veins return, the valves close, the lungs breathe. The whole thing flows on, minute after minute, hour after hour, through the whole of the night. It does not need you to watch over it. It does not need you to remember any of this. It just continues, the way the tide continues, the way the stars continue, whether or not anyone is awake to see them. Now that we have followed the blood through the heart and the vessels, it is worth pausing to ask what the blood is actually carrying and why the body goes to so much trouble to keep it moving. The blood is often described as a river, and that is a fair comparison, but a river carries only water and silt, and whatever falls into it. The blood carries a great deal more. It is more like a moving marketplace, or a postal system, or a delivery network that never closes. Every second, in every part of the body, the blood is picking things up and setting things down, delivering packages and collecting returns, carrying messages from one organ to another, and bringing back the replies. If the cardiovascular system is the transport network, then the blood is the traffic on that network, and the traffic is dense with meaning. Every single thing the blood carries is there for a reason, and every single thing it carries has a destination. The most urgent cargo is oxygen. Oxygen is needed by almost every cell in the body to make energy. The process is called cellular respiration, and it happens in the mitochondria, the little power stations inside the cells that we mentioned earlier. In the mitochondria, oxygen is used to break down glucose and other fuel molecules, releasing the energy stored in their chemical bonds. That energy is captured in a molecule called ATP, and ATP is the cell's main energy currency. Every active process in the body, every muscle contraction, every nerve signal, every heartbeat, every thought, every blink, every breath, runs on ATP. And ATP is made most efficiently in the presence of oxygen. Without oxygen, the mitochondria cannot do their work properly, and energy production drops dramatically. That is why the body is so sensitive to interruptions in oxygen supply. The brain, in particular, is extremely hungry for oxygen. It uses about a fifth of all the oxygen the body takes in, even though it makes up only about 2% of body weight. If the brain is without oxygen for even a few minutes, the consequences can be severe. So oxygen is carried in the blood with great care, attached to hemoglobin inside the red blood cells. Each hemoglobin molecule can carry 4 oxygen molecules, and each red blood cell contains millions of hemoglobin molecules. That is why blood can carry so much oxygen. It is not just dissolved in the water of the plasma, it is packed, neatly and reversibly, onto the iron-rich proteins inside the red cells. When the red cells reach a place where oxygen is scarce, the hemoglobin lets go of the oxygen, and the oxygen diffuses out of the blood and into the tissues. When the red cells reach the lungs, where oxygen is abundant, the hemoglobin picks up more. It is a beautifully simple system. Pick up where there is plenty, release where there is little. The whole body runs on that gradient. The second major cargo is carbon dioxide, which is the waste product of cellular respiration. When the mitochondria burn glucose for energy, they produce carbon dioxide as a byproduct. The carbon dioxide diffuses out of the cells and into the interstitial fluid, and from there into the blood. Only a small part of it is carried dissolved in the plasma. A larger part is carried inside the red blood cells, where it is converted into bicarbonate, a form that travels easily in the blood. When the blood reaches the lungs, the bicarbonate is converted back into carbon dioxide, which diffuses out of the blood and into the air spaces, and is then breathed out. The whole process is efficient and gentle, and it keeps the acidity of the blood in a very narrow range. The body is extremely fussy about the acidity of the blood. If it drifts too far in either direction, the chemical reactions that keep you alive begin to go wrong. So carbon dioxide is not just a waste product, it is also a signal. The level of carbon dioxide in the blood tells the brain how well the lungs are working, and it helps regulate the rate and depth of breathing. When carbon dioxide rises, you breathe more deeply. When it falls, you breathe more shallowly. In this way, the blood is not only carrying waste away, it is carrying information about the state of the body. The blood also carries nutrients. After a meal, the digestive system breaks down food into small molecules, and those molecules are absorbed across the lining of the intestines and into the blood. Glucose, which is the simplest sugar, is one of the most important. It is the main fuel for most cells, and especially for the brain, which cannot burn fat directly. Amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins, are also absorbed into the blood and carried to the liver and to the tissues, where they are used to build and repair the body's structures. Fatty acids and glycerol, the breakdown products of fats, are carried as well, some of them in special transport particles called lipoproteins. Vitamins and minerals, which the body needs in small amounts, also enter the blood from the gut. The blood carries all of these nutrients to the liver first, through the portal vein, as we described earlier, and the liver sorts and processes them before releasing them into the general circulation. That is why the blood leaving the liver has a different composition from the blood entering it. The liver is the body's chemist, adjusting the nutrient mix so that the tissues receive what they need in the right forms and at the right times. The blood carries hormones too. Hormones are chemical messengers produced by glands and released into the blood. They travel through the circulation and affect specific target tissues elsewhere in the body. Insulin, for example, is produced by the pancreas and released into the blood after a meal. It travels to the liver, the muscles, and the fat tissue, and it tells those tissues to take up glucose from the blood. Adrenaline, also called epinephrine, is produced by the adrenal glands in moments of stress or excitement. It travels through the blood to the heart and the blood vessels and the lungs, telling them to speed up and prepare for action. Thyroid hormone, produced by the thyroid gland in the neck, travels to almost every tissue in the body and sets the overall metabolic rate, the speed at which cells burn fuel. Melatonin, produced by the pineal gland in the brain, rises in the evening and tells the body that night has come and it is time to sleep. Right now, as you lie there in the dark, melatonin is moving through your blood, rising slowly, signaling to your brain and your body that the day is over. The blood is the medium through which all these messages travel. It is the slow endocrine mail, as distinct from the fast electrical mail of the nervous system. The nervous system sends messages in milliseconds. The endocrine system sends messages in seconds or minutes or hours. Both use the blood, directly or indirectly, and both are essential. The blood also carries heat. The body generates heat as a byproduct of metabolism, especially in the muscles and the liver. That heat is distributed by the blood, which is why your whole body stays at roughly the same temperature rather than having a hot core and cold limbs. The blood picks up heat in the deep organs and carries it to the surface, where it can be released if you are too warm or conserved if you are too cold. The blood is the central heating system of the body, and the skin is the radiator. When the vessels in the skin dilate, more warm blood flows near the surface, and heat escapes into the air. When they constrict, less blood flows near the surface, and heat is kept inside. The blood is also the coolant system. When you exercise, your muscles produce a great deal of heat, and the blood carries that heat to the skin, where it can be dissipated by sweating and by the direct loss of heat to the air. All of this is controlled by a part of the brain called the hypothalamus, which acts as the body's thermostat, constantly monitoring the temperature of the blood and adjusting the vessels and the sweat glands accordingly. At night, as you fall asleep, the hypothalamus allows the body temperature to drop a little, because a slightly cooler core is part of the signal that tells the brain to stay asleep. That is why a cool room and a warm blanket are such a good combination. The blanket traps just enough heat, while the cool air lets the body settle into its natural nighttime temperature. And the blood carries waste products of all kinds, not just carbon dioxide. Urea, which is produced when proteins are broken down, is carried to the kidneys and filtered out. Bilirubin, which is produced when old red blood cells are broken down, is carried to the liver and then excreted into the bile. Creatinine, which is produced by the muscles as they use energy, is carried to the kidneys and filtered out. Excess salts and water are carried to the kidneys as well, where they are either kept or released, depending on the body's needs. The blood is the great cleaning system of the body, carrying away the debris of metabolism and delivering it to the organs that can remove it. The blood even carries cells that are not blood cells at all. Stem cells, which can become many different kinds of tissue, travel through the blood during development and after injury. Immune cells, the white blood cells, travel through the blood to wherever they are needed. Platelets travel in the blood, ready to form clots wherever a vessel is damaged. The blood is not just a liquid, it is a moving tissue, full of cells and proteins and signals, all suspended in a salty, watery medium that is almost identical in its salt concentration to the ancient seas from which life first emerged. That is a strange and lovely thought, that the blood inside you has the same salt balance as the oceans of the very distant past, as if we are all carrying a little piece of the early earth inside us, pumped around and around by a muscular heart. Now, the blood does not stay the same from hour to hour. It is constantly being made and constantly being recycled. The red blood cells, for example, live for about 120 days. They have no nucleus, which gives them more room for hemoglobin, but it also means they cannot repair themselves or divide. They are born in the bone marrow, the soft, spongy tissue inside the bones, and they are released into the blood fully formed. They circulate for about 4 months, and then they begin to wear out. Old red blood cells are removed from the circulation by the spleen and the liver, which break them down and recycle their components. The iron from the hemoglobin is carefully saved and sent back to the bone marrow to make new red blood cells. The rest of the hemoglobin is converted into bilirubin, which gives bile its yellowish-green color and is eventually excreted. The whole process is a marvel of recycling. Almost nothing is wasted. White blood cells have much shorter lives, sometimes only hours or days, because they are often used up in the process of fighting infections. They are also produced in the bone marrow from the same parent cells that give rise to red blood cells and platelets. Platelets live for about a week, and then they too are removed and replaced. The bone marrow is one of the busiest tissues in the body, producing millions of new blood cells every second, day and night, without ever pausing. It is a quiet factory, hidden inside the hollow centers of the bones, working continuously from before birth until the end of life. When you lie still in bed, the marrow in your ribs and your vertebrae and your pelvis and the ends of your long bones is humming with activity, making the cells that will carry oxygen and fight infection and stop bleeding tomorrow and the next day and the next. So the blood is not a simple thing. It is a living, changing, crowded fluid, full of cells and proteins and signals, carrying oxygen and nutrients and hormones and heat and waste in all directions at once. It is the reason the heart beats, and the reason the vessels branch, and the reason the whole cardiovascular system exists. Every organ in the body depends on the blood, and the blood depends on the heart, and the heart depends on the blood to feed it, and all of it depends on the lungs for oxygen and the gut for fuel, and the kidneys for cleaning. It is a circle of dependencies, a web of mutual support, and it is all happening right now, quietly, in the dark, while you rest. You do not have to think about any of it. The blood will carry on, the heart will carry on, the whole body will carry on, keeping itself alive, keeping itself balanced, keeping itself ready for whatever the next day brings. And you can simply lie there, warm and heavy and still, and let it all happen without you. Let us turn now to the lungs and to the act of breathing, because the blood cannot carry oxygen unless it gets oxygen from somewhere, and that somewhere is the air around you. The air you breathe is a mixture of gases, mostly nitrogen and oxygen, with a little carbon dioxide and water vapor, and a few other trace gases. The oxygen is the part your body needs. Every few seconds, without you having to think about it, you pull a small amount of air into your lungs, and your body takes some of the oxygen out of that air and passes it into the blood. Then you push the air back out, now carrying a little more carbon dioxide and a little less oxygen. That is the whole of breathing in one sentence. Air in, oxygen to blood, carbon dioxide to air, air out. It is so simple that a newborn baby does it without being taught, and so essential that you do it more than 20,000 times a day without ever once thinking about it. The lungs are the organs of breathing. They sit in the chest, on either side of the heart, protected by the ribs and separated from the belly by a flat, dome-shaped sheet of muscle called the diaphragm. The right lung has 3 sections, called lobes, and the left lung has 2, leaving room for the heart to nestle against it. The lungs are soft and spongy and surprisingly light. If you could hold one in your hand, it would feel like a wet sponge, full of tiny air spaces that give it its sponginess. The air spaces are not empty balloons. They are the ends of a branching system of tubes that begins at the nose and the mouth and winds its way down into the depths of the chest. The whole system is called the respiratory tract, and it is a marvel of geometry, designed to get outside air, deep into the body, and to bring it into very close contact with the blood. The journey of a breath begins at the nose, or sometimes at the mouth. The nose is the preferred entrance, because it is built to prepare the air. The inside of the nose is lined with a moist membrane full of tiny blood vessels, which warms the air as it passes through. The same membrane secretes mucus, which catches dust and pollen and other small particles before they can reach the lungs. The nose is also lined with tiny hairs called cilia, which sweep the mucus and the trapped particles toward the back of the throat, where they are swallowed and destroyed by stomach acid. So the nose is not just a hole in the face. It is an air conditioner and a filter, humidifying and cleaning every breath before it goes any deeper. From the nose, the air passes through the pharynx, which is the shared passage for air and food, and then through the larynx, which is the voice box. The larynx contains the vocal cords, 2 small folds of tissue that vibrate when air passes over them, producing sound. That is all the voice is in the end. Air moving over 2 small folds, shaped by the tongue and the lips and the teeth into the sounds of speech. But we are not speaking now. We are breathing, and the air moves through the larynx silently, into the trachea. The trachea is the windpipe, a tube about as wide as a finger, running from the neck down into the chest. It is held open by rings of cartilage, which are firm but flexible, shaped a little like horseshoes. You can feel the front of your windpipe if you touch the front of your neck. Those firm ridges under the skin are the rings of cartilage. They keep the trachea from collapsing when you breathe in, which is important, because breathing in creates a slight negative pressure, like sucking on a straw. If the walls of the trachea were soft, they would collapse under that pressure. The cartilage rings hold them open, while the open part of the horseshoe, at the back, allows the esophagus behind it to expand when you swallow. It is a tidy piece of design, the way the airway and the food pipe share the same neck without getting in each other's way. At the lower end of the trachea, The tube splits into two main branches, called the bronchi, one going to the left lung and one to the right. The bronchi are also held open by cartilage, and they are lined with the same moist, ciliated membrane as the nose and the trachea. Inside the lungs, the bronchi branch again and again, becoming smaller and smaller with each division, like a tree turning from trunk to limbs to branches to twigs. The smallest branches are called bronchioles, and they are so small that they no longer need cartilage to hold them open. They are held open by the pressure of the air inside them and by the elastic recoil of the surrounding lung tissue. The bronchioles lead, at last, to the alveoli. The alveoli are the air sacs, tiny clusters of thin-walled bubbles at the very end of the respiratory tree. There are hundreds of millions of them in each lung, and if you could spread them all out flat, they would cover an area about the size of a tennis court. That is the surface area available for gas exchange. The entire point of the respiratory system is to bring air into contact with a huge, thin, wet surface, and the alveoli are that surface. Each alveolus is wrapped in a net of capillaries, so close that the air in the alveolus is separated from the blood in the capillary by a membrane only about 1/1000th of a millimeter thick. That is thinner than tissue paper, thinner than a soap bubble. It is thin enough that oxygen can slip across it in a fraction of a second, moving from the air into the blood, while carbon dioxide slips across in the other direction, moving from the blood into the air. The whole exchange happens in less time than it takes to read this sentence. The movement of air in and out of the lungs is called ventilation, and it is driven by changes in pressure. The lungs themselves do not have muscles. They cannot pull themselves open or squeeze themselves shut. Instead, they are filled and emptied by the movement of the diaphragm and the muscles between the ribs. When you breathe in, the diaphragm tightens and flattens, moving downward into the belly. At the same time, the muscles between the ribs tighten and lift the ribcage up and outward. The chest cavity becomes larger, and the pressure inside it drops. Because the lungs are attached to the walls of the chest by a thin film of fluid, they are pulled open as the chest expands. Air rushes in through the nose or mouth, down the trachea, through the bronchi and bronchioles, and into the alveoli. That is an inhalation. It takes about 2 seconds when you are resting. Then the diaphragm and the rib muscles relax. The elastic tissue of the lungs pulls them back to their resting size, like a stretched balloon being released. The air is pushed out through the same passages, now carrying its load of carbon dioxide. That is an exhalation. It takes about 3 seconds when you are resting, and then the cycle begins again. In, pause, out, pause. In, pause, out, pause. The rhythm is set by a group of neurons in the brainstem, a small cluster of cells that fire steadily throughout your life, never asking for your attention, never missing a beat. That cluster is called the respiratory center, and it is exquisitely sensitive to the levels of carbon dioxide and oxygen in the blood. If carbon dioxide rises, the respiratory center speeds up and deepens the breath. If carbon dioxide falls, it slows down. The whole system is tuned to keep the blood's gas levels in perfect balance, breath by breath, second by second, without any conscious input from you. The amount of air you move with each breath is called the tidal volume, and when you are resting quietly, it is about 1/2 liter. A little more than that, actually, but 1/2 liter is a good, round, comfortable number. You breathe about 12 to 20 times a minute when you are resting, which works out to something like 10,000 liters of air every day. That is a lot of air, but most of it is not used for gas exchange. Of the 1/2 liter that enters with each breath, only about 1/3 of a liter reaches the alveoli. The rest stays in the conducting passages, the nose and the trachea and the bronchi, where no gas exchange happens. That space is called the anatomical dead space, and it is not wasted because those passages need to stay open and moist and warm in order for the next breath to pass through. But it does mean that the actual gas exchange happens with only the freshest part of the breath, the part that reaches the alveoli. That is fine. The system has more than enough capacity. You do not need to breathe deeply to get enough oxygen. You just need to keep breathing. When you fall asleep, your breathing changes. It becomes slower and more regular. The tidal volume may drop a little, and the respiratory center becomes slightly less responsive to small changes in carbon dioxide. That is normal, and it is part of the body's shift into rest. The muscles of the throat relax, which is why some people snore. The soft tissues at the back of the mouth and throat lose their tension as sleep deepens, and the moving air makes them vibrate. It is usually harmless, just a sound, the body breathing through slightly narrower passages. If the passages narrow too much, the result can be the condition called sleep apnea, where breathing pauses for a moment and then resumes with a small gasp. But for most people, most of the time, the breathing during sleep is quiet and steady and slow, the chest rising and falling under the blankets, the air moving in and out like the tide on a calm shore. It is one of the most restful sounds in the world, and it is also one of the most ancient. Every sleeping animal breathes in its own rhythm, and every one of those rhythms is a variation on the same simple pattern that has been running since the first lungs appeared, hundreds of millions of years ago. The lungs are also part of the body's defense system. The air is full of small particles, and some of them are not friendly. The respiratory tract has layers of protection. The first is the nose, with its hairs and mucus. The second is the mucus blanket that lines the trachea and the bronchi, which traps anything that gets past the nose. The third is the cilia, those tiny hairs that sweep the mucus upward toward the throat, where it can be coughed out or swallowed. The fourth is the immune cells that live in the alveoli, scavenging for any particle that reaches the deepest parts of the lung. These cells, called macrophages, are like sentries, crawling over the inner surfaces of the alveoli and engulfing anything that does not belong. The lungs are not just passive balloons, they are active, living tissues, constantly cleaning and defending themselves. And then there is the voice, which we mentioned briefly. The larynx, the voice box, sits at the top of the trachea. The vocal cords are two folds of tissue stretched across the airway. When you breathe quietly, they are held apart, so the air can pass through without a sound. When you speak, they come together, and the air moving between them makes them vibrate. The pitch of the sound depends on how tight the cords are. The volume depends on how hard the air is pushed. The words are shaped by the tongue, the lips, the teeth, and the palate. All of speech is just breath, shaped. That is why you cannot talk when you are completely out of air. The voice is a wind instrument, and the lungs are the bellows. Right now, as you lie there, the vocal cords are relaxed and apart, and the air moves through them without making a sound. The only voice is the one inside your own head, reading these words, and that voice is made of memory and attention, not of air. So the lungs and the heart work together, side by side in the chest, in a partnership that never pauses. The heart sends blood to the lungs to be refreshed. The lungs send air in and out to refresh it. The blood carries oxygen to every cell. The cells produce carbon dioxide, which the blood carries back to the lungs. The lungs breathe it out, in and out, around and around. The two systems are braided together so tightly that it is hard to say where one ends and the other begins. They are separated by the thin membranes of the alveoli and the capillaries, a boundary so fine that oxygen and carbon dioxide can cross it 100 times a second. And every time you breathe in, you are pulling a little piece of the outside world into the deepest part of your body. And every time you breathe out, you are giving a little piece of your body back to the world. You are exchanging matter with the air, constantly, from your first breath to your last. The oxygen that enters your blood now may become part of a brain cell or a muscle cell or a drop of sweat. The carbon dioxide you breathe out may be taken up by a plant and turned into wood or leaf or flower. The breath connects you to everything else. It is the most ordinary thing in the world, and it is also, if you stop and notice it, a form of communion. But you do not need to stop and notice it. You can let it go on without you. The diaphragm will keep moving, the ribs will keep lifting, the air will keep flowing, The blood will keep taking what it needs and bringing back what it does not. The lungs will keep their quiet rhythm, in and out, all through the night, while you drift further from the day and closer to sleep. The breath is already slowing now. You can feel it if you want to, but you do not have to. You can simply let it happen, as it has been happening all along, and let the next breath come when it comes, and the next, each one a little softer, a little slower, a little closer to the edge of sleep. Now that we have moved through the heart and the blood and the lungs, it is time to look at the body's other great transport and management systems, the ones that work alongside the blood to keep everything clean and balanced and in its proper place. The blood is the most obvious mover of things in the body, but it is not the only one. There is a second set of vessels, a quieter, slower-moving network that runs through almost every tissue, collecting the fluid that leaks out of the capillaries and returning it to the bloodstream. This network is called the lymphatic system, and it is easy to overlook because it does not have a pump like the heart, and it does not carry red blood, and it does not make any sound. But it is just as essential, and it does its work in a way that is almost invisible, like a second, slower river running beneath the first. The lymphatic system begins in the spaces between the cells. We mentioned earlier that the capillaries leak a small amount of fluid into the surrounding tissues. That fluid, the interstitial fluid, bathes the cells and carries nutrients to them and waste away from them. Most of it is reabsorbed into the blood at the far end of the capillary, but a little is left behind. If that little bit were allowed to accumulate, the tissues would swell and the body would slowly drown in its own fluid. The lymphatic system is what prevents that. Tiny, blind-ended vessels, called lymphatic capillaries, lie among the blood capillaries, and they collect the excess interstitial fluid. Once the fluid enters a lymphatic vessel, it is called lymph. Lymph is very similar to plasma, the liquid part of blood, but it has less protein and it contains no red blood cells. It is mostly water, with some white blood cells and dissolved substances. It moves slowly through the lymphatic vessels, not because a heart is pushing it, but because the same three mechanisms that move venous blood also move lymph. The squeezing of skeletal muscles, the pressure changes of breathing, and the presence of one-way valves all work together to push the lymph along, bit by bit, toward the chest. Along the way, the lymph passes through a series of small, bean-shaped organs called lymph nodes. These nodes are the filtering stations of the lymphatic system. They are packed with white blood cells, especially lymphocytes and macrophages, which are the cells that identify and destroy invaders. The lymph flows slowly through the nodes, giving the immune cells time to examine it for anything that should not be there, such as bacteria, viruses, or abnormal cells from a tumor. If something is found, the immune cells mount a response. They multiply, they produce antibodies, they call in reinforcements from the blood. That is why lymph nodes swell when you are sick. The swelling is not a failure of the system. It is the system working, the nodes filling with immune cells and multiplying in their effort to clear an infection. You can feel lymph nodes in a few places on your body, like the sides of the neck, under the jaw, and in the armpits and groin. They are usually small and soft, easy to ignore. When they swell, it is often a sign that the immune system is busy. The lymphatic system also includes the tonsils, which are clusters of lymphatic tissue at the back of the throat, and the spleen, which is a soft organ in the upper left part of the belly that filters the blood and removes old red blood cells. The spleen is sometimes called the largest lymph node, though it is not exactly a node. It is more like a blood-filtering organ that also makes immune cells. It is fragile and full of blood, and it can be injured in accidents, but for now it is enough to know that it sits quietly in the belly, doing its work, checking the blood as it passes through. The lymphatic system also has another, less obvious job. It absorbs fats from the digestive system. The small intestine is lined with tiny finger-like projections called villi, and inside each villus is a small lymphatic vessel called a lacteal. When you eat a meal containing fat, the fat is broken down in the intestine into small droplets and then absorbed into the cells lining the gut. From there, the fat is packaged into small particles called chylomicrons, and those particles are released into the lacteals, not into the blood capillaries. The lymph in the lacteals becomes milky with fat, and that milky lymph is carried through the lymphatic vessels up to the chest, where the main lymphatic duct empties into a large vein near the collarbone. From there, the fat enters the bloodstream and is carried to the liver and to the tissues. So the lymphatic system is not just a drainage system, it is also a fat absorption system, a quiet little highway for the fats you eat. It is yet another example of the body's layered, overlapping design, where no system does only one thing, and every system supports the others. At the top of the chest, the main lymphatic vessels join together and empty into the bloodstream. The largest of these vessels is called the thoracic duct, and it drains most of the body, including both legs, the belly, the left arm, and the left side of the chest and head. A smaller duct, the right lymphatic duct, drains the right arm and the right side of the chest and head. Both ducts empty into the large veins near the heart, where the lymph mingles with the blood and becomes part of the general circulation once more. In this way, the fluid that left the blood at the capillaries is returned to the blood at the chest, having passed through the tissues and the lymph nodes and the lymphatic vessels along the way. The circuit is complete: blood to fluid to lymph to blood. It is a slower circuit than the blood's own circuit, but it is continuous, and it never stops. While the lymphatic system handles the fluid and the immune cells, another system handles the chemical waste. That is the urinary system, and its main organs are the kidneys. The kidneys sit high in the back of the belly, one on each side of the spine, tucked under the lower ribs. They are bean-shaped, about the size of a fist, and they are among the busiest organs in the body. Every minute, about 1 liter of blood flows through the kidneys. That is 1/5 of the blood the heart pumps. Over the course of a day, the kidneys filter something like 180 liters of fluid from the blood. That is enough to fill a large bathtub, but only about 1 or 2 liters of urine are produced. The rest of the filtered fluid is reabsorbed back into the blood, along with the useful substances that were filtered out along with the waste. The kidneys are not just filters. They are more like careful accountants, sorting through everything that passes through them and deciding what to keep and what to discard. The filtering happens in tiny structures called nephrons. Each kidney contains about 1 million nephrons, and each nephron is a microscopic tube with a filter at one end and a collecting duct at the other. The filter is called the glomerulus, a little ball of capillaries that sits inside a cup-shaped structure called Bowman's capsule. Blood flows into the glomerulus under pressure, and the pressure forces water and small dissolved substances through the capillary walls and into the capsule. The large things stay behind, the red blood cells and the proteins and the other big molecules. The fluid that passes through the filter is called filtrate, and it is very similar to plasma but without the proteins. As the filtrate moves along the nephron tube, the surrounding cells reclaim almost everything useful. Water is reabsorbed. Sodium and potassium and calcium and glucose and amino acids are reabsorbed. The cells of the nephron are exquisitely good at this, taking back exactly what the body needs and leaving behind what it does not. What remains at the end is urine, a concentrated solution of urea and excess salts and excess water, along with a few other waste products. The urine flows from the nephrons into collecting ducts, then into the central cavity of the kidney, called the renal pelvis, and then down a tube called the ureter to the bladder. The bladder is a muscular storage organ in the pelvis, and it holds the urine until it is convenient to release it. When the bladder is full, it sends signals to the brain, and if the time is right, the sphincter muscles relax and the urine flows out through the urethra. That is the entire urinary system in brief. Kidneys to ureters to bladder to urethra. Filter, transport, store, release. The kidneys do more than just remove waste. They also regulate the amount of water in the body. If you are dehydrated, the kidneys conserve water, producing a small amount of concentrated urine. If you have drunk a lot of fluid, the kidneys release the excess, producing a larger amount of dilute urine. They regulate the levels of important minerals in the blood, like sodium, potassium, calcium, and phosphate. They help regulate blood pressure by controlling the amount of fluid in the bloodstream and by releasing a substance called renin, which triggers a cascade of chemical signals that tighten the blood vessels. They help regulate the acidity of the blood by excreting hydrogen ions or bicarbonate as needed, and they produce a hormone called erythropoietin, which stimulates the bone marrow to make more red blood cells. So the kidneys are not just waste removers. They are regulators, balancing the fluid and the minerals and the pressure and the pH of the entire body, all while filtering 180 liters of fluid a day. It is a staggering amount of work, and it happens silently, in the dark, without any conscious effort on your part. Even as you sleep, your kidneys are working, making urine, adjusting the blood, keeping the body's internal chemistry in a narrow and life-sustaining range. The liver is another organ that works alongside the blood and the kidneys to keep the body clean and balanced. We have mentioned the liver several times already, and it deserves a closer look. The liver is the largest internal organ, sitting just under the diaphragm on the right side of the belly, protected by the lower ribs. It is a dark, reddish-brown organ, soft and dense, and it performs more than 500 different functions. It is hard to overstate how central the liver is. It is the body's chemical processing plant. Everything absorbed from the gut passes through the liver before it reaches the rest of the body, and the liver decides what happens to it. It stores glucose as glycogen when there is too much, and it releases glucose when there is too little. It makes many of the proteins found in the blood, including albumin, which helps keep fluid in the blood vessels, and clotting factors, which help the blood clot when a vessel is damaged. It makes bile, a greenish fluid that is stored in the gallbladder and released into the small intestine, where it helps digest fats. It processes old red blood cells and recycles their iron. It detoxifies drugs and alcohol and other harmful substances, converting them into forms that can be excreted by the kidneys or the gut. It stores vitamins and minerals, including iron, copper, and vitamins A, D, and B12. It helps regulate the levels of hormones in the blood. It is, in short, the body's great multi-purpose organ, the chemical brain of the metabolism. And it does all of this quietly, continuously, without ever calling attention to itself. You cannot feel your liver working. There is no sensation of it, no awareness of its labors. It just works, day and night, keeping the blood clean and the body supplied. The liver also has a remarkable ability to repair itself. If part of the liver is removed, the remaining part can grow back to nearly its original size in a matter of weeks. It is one of the few organs in the body with that ability. The skin can heal, the bone can mend, but the liver can actually regenerate. That does not mean it is invulnerable. It can be damaged by long-term exposure to alcohol, or by hepatitis viruses, or by the accumulation of fat. But its capacity for regrowth is a sign of how vital it is. The body invests heavily in its liver because it cannot survive without it. So the body has not one but several systems for keeping things clean and balanced. The blood carries waste to the kidneys and the lungs. The lymphatic system drains the tissues and fights infection. The kidneys filter the blood and regulate the fluid and the minerals. The liver processes everything, stores what is useful, neutralizes what is harmful, and makes the proteins that keep the whole system running. And all of these systems work together, not as separate departments but as a single integrated whole. The blood cannot stay clean without the kidneys and the liver. The tissues cannot stay dry without the lymphatics. The body cannot stay balanced without all of them. It is a web of mutual support, each part depending on the others, and all of it happening while you sleep. The blood is flowing, the lymph is creeping, the kidneys are filtering, the liver is processing, the body is keeping itself in balance, minute by minute, without you having to do anything at all. That is the quiet genius of the body. It is always working, always adjusting, always repairing, and it asks nothing from the conscious mind except to rest and let it happen. Let us turn now to the digestive system, because the body cannot run on air and water alone. It needs fuel, and that fuel comes from food. The digestive system is the body's way of taking food from the outside world, breaking it down into pieces small enough to enter the blood, and then getting rid of what is left over. It is a long, muscular tube that runs from the mouth to the anus, with a series of organs attached along the way that add their secretions to the process. The tube itself is called the gastrointestinal tract, or the alimentary canal, and it is about 9 meters long in an adult. That is roughly the length of a small bus, and yet it is all coiled up inside the belly, folded and looped and packed into a space no bigger than a large handbag. It is one of the great feats of biological packing, this long, twisting tube that somehow fits inside the abdomen without tangling or kinking. The digestive system is not technically inside the body in the way the heart or the liver are inside the body. The tube is open at both ends, to the mouth at the top and to the anus at the bottom. The space inside the tube is continuous with the outside world. What is in your intestine is not yet in your body, in the sense that it is not yet in your blood or your cells. It is passing through. The body has to decide what to let in and what to keep out, and that is the job of the inner lining of the gut. That lining is a single layer of epithelial cells, the same kind of covering tissue we met earlier, and it is the great gatekeeper of the body. Everything you swallow must cross that layer before it can enter the blood. Nothing enters the body proper without passing through the gut wall. That is a strange and important idea, that the food you eat is still outside you until the moment it is absorbed. The gut is the border between the outside world and the inside world, and the border is very carefully guarded. The process of digestion begins in the mouth. You chew. Chewing is a mechanical act, the teeth grinding food into smaller pieces, but it is also the first step in the chemical breakdown of food. The salivary glands, 3 pairs of them, release saliva into the mouth as you chew. Saliva is mostly water, but it also contains an enzyme called salivary amylase, which begins the breakdown of starch into sugar. That is why a piece of bread tastes slightly sweet if you chew it for a long time. The starch is being broken down into maltose, a sugar, right there on your tongue. Saliva also contains mucus, which lubricates the food and makes it easier to swallow. And it contains small amounts of antibacterial substances, which help keep the mouth clean. By the time you swallow, the food has been formed into a soft, wet ball called a bolus, and it is ready to begin its journey down the esophagus. The esophagus is a muscular tube that runs from the throat to the stomach, behind the trachea and the heart, through an opening in the diaphragm. It is about 25 centimeters long. The walls of the esophagus are made of smooth muscle, the kind that works on its own, and they contract in a coordinated wave that pushes the bolus downward. That wave is called peristalsis, and it is the same kind of movement that moves food all the way through the digestive tract. It is not gravity that moves food from the mouth to the stomach. It is peristalsis. Astronauts in space can eat and swallow normally, even without gravity, because the muscles of the gut do the work. Peristalsis is a slow, rippling squeeze, like a hand milking a long balloon, and it moves the food along at about 2 to 4 centimeters per second. The whole trip from mouth to stomach takes about 5 to 8 seconds for a liquid and a little longer for solid food. At the lower end of the esophagus, there is a ring of muscle called the lower esophageal sphincter, which opens to let the bolus pass into the stomach and then closes to keep the stomach contents from coming back up. If that sphincter is weak, stomach acid can splash up into the esophagus, causing heartburn. That is a common and uncomfortable thing, but it is also a sign of how carefully the body tries to keep the compartments separate. The stomach is a muscular bag in the upper left part of the belly, just below the ribs. When empty, it is about the size of a small sausage. When full, it can stretch to hold about a liter or even more. The stomach has 3 main jobs. It stores food and releases it slowly into the small intestine. It mixes the food with gastric juice, turning the bolus into a thick, soupy liquid called chyme, and it begins the digestion of protein. The gastric juice is produced by glands in the lining of the stomach, and it is a remarkable fluid. It contains hydrochloric acid, which is strong enough to dissolve metal, and an enzyme called pepsin, which begins to break down protein into smaller pieces. The acid also kills most of the bacteria that enter the stomach with food. The stomach is protected from its own acid by a thick layer of mucus and by the rapid replacement of its lining cells. The cells of the stomach lining are replaced every few days, which is necessary because they live in a very harsh environment. The acid in the stomach is not just a chemical weapon, it is also a signal. It helps activate pepsin and it helps release other digestive juices later in the gut. And the stomach does not just hold and mix food, it also produces a substance called intrinsic factor, which is needed for the absorption of vitamin B12 later in the small intestine. Without intrinsic factor, B12 cannot be absorbed, and without B12, the body cannot make red blood cells properly. So the stomach is not just a pouch of acid, it is a carefully regulated organ with a dozen different jobs. From the stomach, the chyme passes a little at a time through the pyloric sphincter into the small intestine. The small intestine is the longest part of the digestive tract, about 6 meters in length, and it is where most of the digestion and absorption happens. It is called small because of its diameter, not its length. It is only about 2.5 centimeters wide, much narrower than the large intestine. The small intestine is divided into 3 parts: the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. But for our purposes tonight, it is enough to know that it is a long, coiled tube in the center of the belly, and it is the main site of nutrient absorption. The inside of the small intestine is not smooth. It is folded into circular ridges, and those ridges are covered with millions of tiny finger-like projections called villi, and each villus is covered with even tinier projections called microvilli. That is 3 levels of folding, and the result is an enormous surface area, about the size of a tennis court again, all packed into a tube 6 meters long. The whole point of the folding is to maximize the surface over which food can be absorbed. The more surface there is, the more contact there is between the food and the lining, and the more efficient the absorption. The small intestine does not do its work alone. It receives help from 3 accessory organs: the pancreas, a soft, elongated gland behind the stomach, produces a juice full of enzymes that digest carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. It also produces bicarbonate, which neutralizes the acid from the stomach, so the intestinal lining is not damaged. The liver produces bile, which is stored in the gallbladder and released into the duodenum. Bile does not digest fat directly. It emulsifies it, breaking large fat droplets into smaller ones so that the pancreatic enzymes can reach them. Without bile, fat digestion is much less efficient. The pancreas and the liver are the small intestine's partners, adding their secretions at just the right point, just as the chyme enters the duodenum. Together, the 3 of them turn the semi-digested food from the stomach into a thin, milky liquid from which the nutrients can be absorbed. The absorption itself happens through the cells that line the villi. These cells, called enterocytes, have tiny hair-like microvilli on their surfaces, and they are built to take things in. Carbohydrates are broken down into simple sugars, mostly glucose, and absorbed into the blood. Proteins are broken down into amino acids and absorbed into the blood. Fats are broken down into fatty acids and monoglycerides, absorbed into the enterocytes, reassembled into triglycerides, packaged into chylomicrons, and then released into the lacteals, the lymphatic vessels we mentioned earlier. The blood from the small intestine, carrying the sugars and the amino acids, goes first to the liver through the portal vein. The lymph from the small intestine, carrying the fats, bypasses the liver at first and enters the bloodstream at the chest. Eventually, the fats reach the liver too, just by a slower route. By the time the chyme reaches the end of the small intestine, most of the nutrients have been absorbed. What remains is mostly water, indigestible fiber, and a few leftover substances. The large intestine, also called the colon, is the last part of the digestive tract. It is wider than the small intestine but much shorter, only about 1.5 meters long. It runs up the right side of the belly, across the top, and down the left side, before turning into the rectum and ending at the anus. The large intestine has several jobs. It absorbs water and salts from the remaining material, converting it from a liquid into a solid. It houses a vast community of bacteria, the gut microbiome, which ferments some of the indigestible fiber and produces useful substances, including certain vitamins and short-chain fatty acids. Those bacteria are not invaders. They are partners, living in the gut in enormous numbers, helping with digestion and supporting the immune system. The large intestine also stores the waste material, called feces, until it is ready to be expelled. The whole process, from mouth to anus, takes about 24 to 72 hours, depending on the person and the food. And at every step, the muscles of the gut are moving, the glands are secreting, the nerves are sensing, and the blood is carrying away the absorbed nutrients. The digestive system is one of the most complex systems in the body, and it is also one of the most forgiving. It can handle an enormous variety of foods, recover from most insults, and keep working day after day, year after year, without complaint. The digestive system is also closely tied to the nervous system. The gut has its own network of nerves, called the enteric nervous system, which is sometimes called the second brain. It contains hundreds of millions of neurons, more than the spinal cord, and it can operate independently of the brain. It controls peristalsis, regulates secretions, and monitors the state of the gut wall. It talks to the brain through the vagus nerve, and the brain talks back. That is why your gut can influence your mood, and your mood can influence your gut. When you are anxious, your digestion slows or speeds or becomes uncomfortable. When you are calm and resting, your digestion proceeds smoothly. Right now, as you lie there, your gut is working quietly, processing whatever you ate earlier, absorbing what is left to absorb, and moving the rest along. It is one of the reasons sleep is so restorative. The body can devote its energy to the slow, patient work of digestion and repair, without the demands of the waking world. And so the digestive system, like all the others, is part of the great web of the body. It brings in fuel. The blood carries the fuel to the cells. The cells burn the fuel with oxygen from the lungs. The waste products are carried to the kidneys, and the liver and the lungs for disposal. The lymphatics drain the excess fluid. The heart keeps everything moving. The nervous system coordinates it all. No system works alone. Each one supports the others. And the whole thing is happening right now, in the quiet dark, while you drift. The stomach is emptying. The small intestine is absorbing, the liver is sorting, the pancreas is secreting, the blood is carrying, the heart is beating, the lungs are breathing, the kidneys are filtering, the lymph is flowing. The body is alive, in the fullest sense, and all you have to do is lie there and let it be alive. Let us turn now to the nervous system, because everything we have described so far, the heart and the lungs and the gut and the kidneys, all of it is coordinated by a network of cells whose only job is to send signals. The nervous system is the body's fast communication system, the wiring that connects every part to every other part and to the central command center in the skull and the spine. It is made of nervous tissue, which we met briefly at the very beginning of this whole walk. Nervous tissue is composed mainly of neurons, the long, thin cells that carry electrical signals, and glial cells, the support cells that feed and protect and insulate the neurons. The neurons are the stars of the show, but the glial cells do much of the behind-the-scenes work, and without them the neurons could not function. The nervous system is often described as the most complex structure in the known universe, and that is not an exaggeration. The human brain alone contains around 86 billion neurons, and each neuron can connect to thousands of others, forming trillions of connections, called synapses. The number of possible patterns of activity in that network is so vast that it is beyond comprehension, and yet, For all that complexity, the basic operation is simple. A neuron receives a signal, and if the signal is strong enough, the neuron sends a signal of its own. That is all. Millions of neurons doing that, in organized circuits, produce everything you have ever thought or felt or done. The nervous system has two main divisions. The first is the central nervous system, which consists of the brain and the spinal cord. The brain is the control center, the organ of thought and memory and emotion and decision. The spinal cord is the great trunk line, running from the brain down through the vertebral column, carrying signals to and from the rest of the body. The second division is the peripheral nervous system, which consists of all the nerves that branch out from the brain and spinal cord to every part of the body. The peripheral nerves are the cables that connect the central nervous system to the muscles and the glands and the skin and the organs. They carry sensory signals inward from the body to the brain and motor signals outward from the brain to the body. The whole arrangement is like a tree. The brain and spinal cord are the trunk, and the peripheral nerves are the branches, reaching out to every leaf and twig. The peripheral nervous system is itself divided into two functional parts. The somatic nervous system controls the things you do on purpose, the voluntary movements of skeletal muscle. When you decide to turn over in bed, or stretch your legs, or scratch your nose, you are using the somatic nervous system. It is the system of conscious action. The autonomic nervous system controls the things you do not do on purpose, the involuntary functions of the body, like the heartbeat, the breathing, the digestion, the sweating, the widening and narrowing of blood vessels. The autonomic nervous system runs the background operations of the body, and it is divided again into two branches that work in balance. The sympathetic branch is the one that prepares the body for action. It speeds the heart, opens the airways, raises the blood pressure, and diverts blood away from the gut and toward the muscles. It is the branch of alertness and effort. The parasympathetic branch is the one that calms the body down. It slows the heart, encourages digestion, relaxes the blood vessels, and promotes rest and repair. It is the branch of rest and recovery. The two branches are not enemies. They are partners, shifting the balance from moment to moment, depending on what the body needs. During the day, the sympathetic branch tends to dominate because the waking world demands action. At night, as you settle into sleep, the parasympathetic branch takes over, slowing the heart, lowering the blood pressure, and letting the body turn its attention inward, to digestion and repair and rest. That is why sleep is such a deeply restorative state. It is the time when the parasympathetic system is in charge, and the body can do its quiet work without interruption. The brain itself is an organ of unrivaled complexity, and it is also a physical structure, made of tissues and fluids and blood vessels, sitting inside the hard shell of the skull. It is divided into several major parts, each with its own responsibilities, though they all work together as a single whole. The largest part is the cerebrum, the wrinkled, dome-shaped mass that fills most of the skull. The cerebrum is divided into two hemispheres, left and right, connected by a thick band of fibers called the corpus callosum. The surface of the cerebrum is the cerebral cortex, a thin layer of gray matter, only a few millimeters thick, where most of the higher functions of the brain live. The cortex is folded into ridges and grooves, which is why the brain looks wrinkled. The folding increases the surface area, allowing more cortex to fit inside the skull. Different parts of the cortex do different jobs. The back of the cortex processes vision. The sides process hearing and language. The top processes touch and movement. The front, the prefrontal cortex, is involved in planning and decision and personality and restraint. It is the last part of the brain to mature, which is why young people sometimes do impulsive things. The cortex is the part of the brain that makes you who you are, in the sense of your conscious self, your memories, your thoughts, your preferences, your voice. But it is not the whole brain. Beneath the cortex, deeper inside, are older structures that handle more basic functions. The thalamus is a relay station, sorting sensory information and sending it to the cortex. The hypothalamus, which we mentioned earlier, is a small structure that controls hunger, thirst, body temperature, sleep, and the autonomic nervous system. It is the bridge between the nervous system and the endocrine system, and it is one of the main regulators of the body's internal state. The limbic system is a group of structures involved in emotion and memory. The hippocampus, part of the limbic system, is essential for forming new memories. The amygdala, another part, is involved in fear and emotional responses. The basal ganglia are involved in movement and habit. The cerebellum, a folded structure at the back of the brain, below the cerebrum, is involved in balance, coordination, and the fine-tuning of movement. It is the part of the brain that lets you walk smoothly and reach for things without knocking them over. And the brainstem, at the very base of the brain, is the oldest and most essential part. It controls breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, and the sleep-wake cycle. It is the part of the brain that keeps you alive when the rest of the brain is asleep. Damage to the brainstem is often fatal because it controls the functions that cannot stop. The spinal cord extends down from the brainstem through a channel in the bones of the spine, and it carries signals between the brain and the body. It is not just a passive cable. It also contains circuits that handle reflexes, the fast, automatic responses that happen before the brain is even aware of them. If you touch something hot, the signal travels up a sensory nerve to the spinal cord, and a motor signal is sent back down to the muscle, all before the brain has time to register the pain. That is a reflex. It is a survival mechanism, a way of responding to danger as quickly as possible. The brain is informed later, and it can modify or override the reflex, but the first response comes from the spinal cord. The spinal cord is also the site of the nerve pathways that control walking and other rhythmic movements, though the brain is still needed to initiate and direct those movements. The central nervous system is not a simple hierarchy. It is a network, with processing happening at every level, from the cortex to the spinal cord to the nerves themselves. The cells that make up this system are remarkable. A neuron has a cell body, containing the nucleus, and two kinds of branches. The dendrites are the receiving branches, short and often bushy, picking up signals from other neurons. The axon is the sending branch, long and thin, carrying signals away from the cell body to other neurons, or to muscles or glands. Some axons are microscopic, and some are more than a meter long, running all the way from the base of the spine to the toe. The signal that travels along an axon is an electrical impulse, a brief change in the voltage across the cell membrane. That impulse is called an action potential, and it travels at speeds ranging from a few meters per second to over 100 meters per second, depending on the axon. The fastest axons are wrapped in a fatty insulation called myelin, produced by glial cells, which speeds the signal along like insulation on a wire. When the action potential reaches the end of the axon, it triggers the release of chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. The neurotransmitters cross the tiny gap between neurons, called the synapse, and bind to receptors on the next neuron. If enough of them bind, the next neuron fires its own action potential, and the signal continues. That is how information moves through the nervous system. Electrical signals along the neurons, chemical signals across the synapses. It is a language of pulses and molecules, and it is the basis of everything you sense and do and think and feel. Right now, as you lie there, your nervous system is doing something very particular. It is letting you fall asleep. Sleep is not the absence of brain activity. It is a change in the pattern of brain activity, a shift from the fast, irregular rhythms of waking to the slow, regular rhythms of deep sleep. The brain waves change, the muscles relax, the heart slows, the breathing deepens, the body temperature drops, the parasympathetic system takes over, and the brain itself begins to cycle through the stages of sleep, from light sleep to deep sleep to dreaming sleep, each stage with its own characteristic rhythms and functions. Deep sleep is the stage when the body repairs itself, when growth hormone is released, when the immune system is strengthened. Dreaming sleep, also called rapid eye movement sleep, is when most dreams occur, and it is essential for memory and learning and emotional processing. The two kinds of sleep alternate throughout the night, in cycles of about 90 minutes, with deep sleep dominating the first half of the night, and dreaming sleep dominating the second half. The whole process is orchestrated by the hypothalamus and the brainstem, and it is exquisitely sensitive to light and dark, to temperature, to the rhythms of the day. The body has an internal clock, called the circadian rhythm, which is set by the rising and setting of the sun, and it tells the brain when to be awake and when to be asleep. Melatonin, the hormone we mentioned earlier, rises as darkness falls, and it helps the brain make the transition. Right now, that transition is happening. The body is letting go of the day. The nervous system is quieting down, lowering its voice, settling into the slow rhythms of the night. The neurons are still firing, but in softer, slower patterns, like a city turning off its lights, one window at a time. And yet, even in the deepest sleep, the nervous system never completely stops. It continues to monitor the body. It continues to regulate the heartbeat and the breathing and the temperature. It continues to filter sounds and sensations, deciding what is important enough to wake you and what can be ignored. It continues to process memories, sorting through the events of the day, strengthening some connections and pruning others. It continues to dream, in the later stages of the night, weaving fragments of experience into stories that may or may not be remembered. The nervous system is always on, always working, always adjusting. It is the great coordinator, the master regulator, the system that makes all the other systems work together. And it is also the system that lets you rest, because rest is not something the body does when the nervous system shuts down. Rest is something the nervous system actively creates, a state of lowered arousal and increased parasympathetic activity, a state in which the body can repair itself and prepare for the next day. It is a gift the nervous system gives you every night without being asked. And so the brain and the spinal cord and the nerves carry you down into sleep, the way they have done every night of your life. The signals slow, the chemicals shift, the muscles let go, the eyelids fall, the breath deepens, the heart beats a little more slowly, the blood flows a little more gently. The body, which has been awake and busy and responsive all day, begins to power down, not completely, but enough to rest. Enough to repair, enough to dream. And you, the conscious you, the part that reads these words and wonders about them, can let go. The nervous system has it from here. It will keep the body safe. It will keep the heart beating. It will keep the breath moving. It will keep the blood flowing. And it will wake you in the morning, when the light returns and the day begins again. But that is hours away. For now, there is only the slow, soft drift of the night, and the quiet work of the body, and the long, gentle fall into sleep. Let us turn now to the quieter systems, the ones that work more slowly than the nervous system, but no less thoroughly. The nervous system sends its messages in milliseconds, through electrical impulses and chemical bursts. But there is another communication system in the body, one that moves through the blood and works over seconds and minutes and hours and even days. That is the endocrine system, the system of hormones. Hormones are chemical messengers produced by glands and released into the blood, and they travel through the circulation to reach their target tissues. They do not carry information as quickly as nerves do, but they carry it more broadly, and they can sustain their effects for much longer. If the nervous system is the telephone network, the endocrine system is the postal service. One is fast and precise. The other is slower but reaches everywhere, and its messages can linger. The endocrine system is made up of a number of glands scattered throughout the body. A gland is simply a structure that produces and releases a substance. Some glands release their products through ducts to a surface, like sweat glands releasing sweat onto the skin, or salivary glands releasing saliva into the mouth. Those are exocrine glands. Endocrine glands are different. They have no ducts. They release their products, the hormones, directly into the blood, and the blood carries them away. The word endocrine means internal secretion, which is exactly what these glands do. They secrete internally, into the body's own circulation. The major endocrine glands include the pituitary, a pea-sized gland at the base of the brain, the thyroid, a butterfly-shaped gland in the front of the neck, the parathyroid glands, 4 tiny glands embedded in the back of the thyroid, the adrenal glands, 2 small glands sitting on top of the kidneys, the pancreas, which has both endocrine and exocrine functions, the ovaries in women and the testes in men, and the pineal gland, a tiny gland deep in the brain that produces melatonin. There are also other tissues that produce hormones, like the kidneys, which produce erythropoietin, and the heart, which produces a hormone called atrial natriuretic peptide that helps regulate blood pressure, and the fat tissue, which produces hormones that influence appetite and metabolism. The endocrine system is not a single, tidy organ system. It is a scattered network of hormone-producing tissues, all working together to regulate the body's long-term functions. At the center of the endocrine system is the pituitary gland, and at the center of the pituitary is its connection to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, as we have said, is a small structure at the base of the brain that regulates many of the body's basic drives. It is also the bridge between the nervous system and the endocrine system. The hypothalamus produces hormones that control the pituitary, and the pituitary produces hormones that control most of the other endocrine glands. The pituitary is often called the master gland because it directs the thyroid, the adrenals, the ovaries, the testes, and several other tissues. But the pituitary is itself directed by the hypothalamus, which receives input from the rest of the brain and from the blood. So the chain of command runs from the brain to the hypothalamus, to the pituitary, to the other glands, to the body. It is a hierarchy of chemical signals, each level adjusting the next, keeping the whole system in balance. The thyroid gland is a good example of how the system works. The thyroid produces 2 main hormones, thyroxine and triiodothyronine, usually called T4 and T3. These hormones set the body's metabolic rate, the speed at which cells burn energy. Too much thyroid hormone, and the body runs hot and fast, with a rapid heart rate, weight loss, and nervousness. Too little, and the body runs cold and slow, with fatigue, weight gain, and sluggishness. The level of thyroid hormone is controlled by the pituitary, which produces thyroid-stimulating hormone, which tells the thyroid to make more T4 and T3. The pituitary is controlled by the hypothalamus, which produces thyrotropin-releasing hormone, and the whole loop is regulated by feedback. When thyroid hormone levels in the blood are high, the pituitary and the hypothalamus sense it and reduce their output. When levels are low, they increase it. It is a thermostat, a system of checks and balances, and it keeps the metabolic rate stable within a narrow range. The same pattern applies to the adrenal glands and the sex hormones and the other endocrine axes. The hypothalamus and the pituitary sense the levels in the blood and adjust their signals accordingly. The body is constantly tuning itself, and the endocrine system is one of its main tuning mechanisms. The adrenal glands are particularly interesting because they produce hormones that deal with stress. Each adrenal gland has 2 parts. The outer part, the cortex, produces steroid hormones, including cortisol, which helps regulate metabolism and the stress response, and aldosterone, which helps regulate blood pressure and salt balance. The inner part, the medulla, produces adrenaline and noradrenaline, the hormones of immediate arousal. When you are startled, or when you need to act quickly, the sympathetic nervous system triggers the release of adrenaline from the adrenal medulla. Adrenaline increases the heart rate, opens the airways, raises the blood pressure, and releases glucose into the blood. It is the body's alarm system, preparing you for fight or flight. Cortisol works more slowly. It rises over minutes and hours, and it helps the body cope with longer-term stress, mobilizing energy, suppressing inflammation, and sharpening attention. But cortisol, is meant to rise and fall in a daily rhythm, high in the morning, low at night. Chronic stress, the kind that never really lets go, can keep cortisol levels elevated for too long, and that can disrupt sleep and digestion and immune function. The body is built to handle short bursts of stress, followed by rest. It is not built to live in a constant state of alarm. One of the quiet gifts of sleep is that it gives the stress system a chance to reset, to lower the cortisol and raise the restorative hormones, to let the body come back to its baseline. The pancreas is another endocrine gland, and it is essential for regulating blood sugar. We have mentioned it before, in passing, but it deserves a closer look. The pancreas sits behind the stomach, in the upper left part of the belly, and it has two jobs. Its exocrine job is to produce digestive enzymes, which it releases into the small intestine through a duct. Its endocrine job is to produce insulin and glucagon, two hormones that control the level of glucose in the blood. Insulin is released when blood glucose is high, after a meal. It tells the cells of the body to take up glucose from the blood, and it tells the liver to store glucose as glycogen. Glucagon is released when blood glucose is low, between meals or during fasting. It tells the liver to break down glycogen and release glucose back into the blood. Together, insulin and glucagon keep the blood glucose level within a narrow range, ensuring that the brain and the rest of the body always have a steady supply of fuel. If insulin is lacking, or if the cells become resistant to it, the result is diabetes, a condition in which blood glucose rises too high. The body is exquisitely tuned to keep glucose in balance because the brain depends on it, and the brain is not forgiving of shortages. The reproductive glands, the ovaries and the testes, produce the sex hormones, estrogen and progesterone in women, testosterone in men. These hormones are responsible for the development of secondary sexual characteristics, the regulation of the menstrual cycle, the production of sperm and eggs, and the maintenance of pregnancy. They also affect bone density, muscle mass, mood, and energy. The sex hormones are controlled by the pituitary, which produces follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, which are in turn controlled by the hypothalamus. It is the same hierarchical pattern, the same loop of feedback, the same principle of balance. The endocrine system is a network of loops, each one sensing and adjusting, raising and lowering, keeping the body in its narrow, life-sustaining ranges. And then there is the pineal gland, which is the gland of the night. It sits deep in the center of the brain, behind the eyes, and it produces melatonin. Melatonin is the hormone of darkness. It rises in the evening as the light fades, and it peaks in the middle of the night. It signals to the body that it is time to wind down, time to sleep. It is not a sedative, exactly. It is more like a messenger, telling the brain and the body that the night has arrived. The pineal gland receives information about light and dark from the eyes through a pathway that runs through the hypothalamus, and it adjusts its melatonin production accordingly. In the summer, when the days are long, melatonin rises later. In the winter, when the nights are long, it rises earlier. Right now, as you lie in the dark, your pineal gland is producing melatonin, and it is helping you drift. The light from a screen, if you were looking at one, would suppress melatonin and make sleep harder. Darkness allows it to rise. That is why the old advice to sleep in a dark room is not just folk wisdom, it is physiology. The pineal gland needs darkness to do its work. The endocrine system also interacts with the immune system. Some hormones, like cortisol, suppress immune function. Others, like growth hormone and thyroid hormone, support it. The immune system, in turn, produces chemical signals called cytokines that can influence the brain and the endocrine glands. The body is not a collection of separate systems. It is a single, integrated network, with the nervous system and the endocrine system and the immune system all talking to one another, all influencing one another, all working together to keep the whole thing running. That is one of the deepest truths of anatomy and physiology. The systems are not isolated. They are braided together, like rivers joining and splitting and joining again, and the health of the whole depends on the health of each part and on the flow between them. Right now, as you lie there, the endocrine system is doing its quiet nighttime work. Melatonin is high, cortisol is low, growth hormone is rising, preparing to repair the tissues and build new proteins while you sleep. Insulin is doing its gentle dance with glucagon, keeping the blood glucose steady through the long hours of fasting. The thyroid is setting the metabolic rate at its low nighttime level. The adrenals are quiet. The reproductive hormones are cycling through their own rhythms. The whole chemical orchestra is playing its nighttime score, and the music is soft and slow. You do not have to listen. You do not have to do anything. The hormones are not asking for your attention. They are simply doing what they have always done, in the dark, while the body rests and repairs and prepares for the day to come. And you can let them. You can let the whole system hum along without you, carrying you down into the deeper stages of sleep, where the conscious mind lets go and the body takes over entirely. That is the gift of the endocrine system, the slow, patient, chemical gift of rest. It has been given to you every night of your life, and it is being given to you now, as you lie there, warm and still and fading. Let it work. Let it carry you. The night is long, and the body knows what to do with it. Now we have walked through the heart and the blood, the lungs and the lymph, the gut and the kidneys, the brain and the nerves, and the slow chemical music of the hormones. We have moved from the smallest cell up through tissues and organs and systems, and we have seen how the body is not a machine made of separate parts, but a living community, a web of systems all leaning on one another, all talking to one another, all working together in a rhythm that never stops. What remains now is to gather it all together, not as a summary, but as a way of letting the whole picture settle. Because the body is not something you need to hold in your mind as a list of parts. It is something you can feel, even now, even in the dark, even as sleep pulls at you. It is the weight of your limbs against the bed. It is the slow rise and fall of your chest. It is the soft, steady pulse in your neck and your wrists and your temples. It is the warmth under the blankets. It is the quiet awareness, fading at the edges, that you are alive. All of that is anatomy and physiology. All of that is the body doing what it does. The word anatomy comes from a Greek word meaning to cut up, because the early anatomists learned about the body by taking it apart. But the body is not meant to be understood only in pieces. It is a whole, and the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Physiology is the study of how the parts work together, how the cells talk to the tissues and the tissues to the organs and the organs to the systems. And the deeper you look, the more you see that everything is connected. The heart cannot beat without the blood to fill it and the lungs to refresh it. The lungs cannot breathe without the muscles of the chest and the nerves that drive them. The nerves cannot fire without the oxygen and glucose the blood brings. The blood cannot carry oxygen without the iron in the red cells and the protein in the plasma. The iron comes from food, and the food is absorbed by the gut, and the gut is regulated by the hormones, and the hormones are controlled by the brain. And the brain, at this moment, is doing the most natural thing in the world. It is letting you sleep. Sleep is not a pause in the body's activity. It is a change in the pattern of activity. During sleep, the body shifts its priorities. The muscles relax. The heart slows. The breathing deepens. The digestion continues. The immune system releases its signals. The brain clears away the byproducts of the day's thinking. The tissues repair themselves. The hormones of growth and restoration rise. The body is not idle. It is busy, but in a different way, a quieter way, a way that does not require you. That is the deepest comfort of all. The body does not need you to run it. It has been running itself since before you were born, and it will continue to run itself long after you fall asleep tonight. The part of you that worries and plans and remembers and tries, that part can step aside. The body will carry on without it. Think back to the city, the comparison we made at the very beginning. The cells are the people. The tissues are the households. The organs are the neighborhoods. The systems are the districts. and the whole body is the city, alive and humming, full of movement and exchange. At night, the city does not shut down, it changes. The streets grow quieter, the lights dim, the traffic thins, but the essential services continue. The power plant keeps generating, the water keeps flowing, the waste keeps being collected, the hospitals keep their lights on. The city is still alive, still working, still maintaining itself, even while most of its people sleep. That is what your body is doing right now. The heart keeps pumping, the lungs keep breathing, the kidneys keep filtering, the liver keeps processing, the immune system keeps watch, the brain keeps its quiet rhythms, moving through the stages of sleep, tending to the needs of the sleeping city. And you, the conscious you, the mayor of the city, can rest. The city does not need your attention. It knows what to do. It has always known what to do. And so, as this long walk comes to an end, there is nothing you need to remember. There is no test. There is no list of terms to hold in your head. The names will fade, and that is fine. The body will not forget them. The sinoatrial node will keep firing. The alveoli will keep exchanging. The nephrons will keep filtering. The neurons will keep signaling. The mitochondria will keep burning fuel and making energy. The whole beautiful, complex, self-regulating system will keep going, whether you remember a single word of this or not. That is the point. The body is not a lesson to be learned. It is a home to be lived in. And tonight, the home is quiet and warm and safe. The doors are locked, the lights are low, the systems are running. All is well. If you want to come back to any of this while you are awake, the No Fluff Anatomy and Physiology Guide is at the link in the description, and it covers the same ground in a form you can actually read. The same quiet facts, the same slow structure, but in pages instead of in sound. It will be there when you wake, if you want it. And there is also a companion channel, No Fluff Academy, for anyone who wants the same subject taught properly, while awake, with a clear mind and a notebook. But those are daytime things. They belong to the morning. They do not belong to now. Now, there is only the bed and the dark and the slow tide of your breath. The heart is beating. The blood is moving. The lungs are filling and emptying. The body is warm and heavy and still. The night is around you like a blanket, and the day is already slipping away, back into the past where all days go. You do not need to chase it. You do not need to hold on to anything. You can let the words go. You can let the names go. You can let the whole structure of the body go, cell by cell and system by system, until there is nothing left to hold but the simple fact of being here, lying still, breathing slowly, drifting. That is enough. That has always been enough. The body knows how to do the rest. It is doing it now. And in a little while, when the last thread of waking finally lets go, the body will carry you down into the deep, slow waters of sleep, and it will keep you safe there, all through the night, until the morning comes.